This is Dan Ferrisi welcoming you to AV Plus, the podcast for the commercial AV integration industry. I'm really excited to be kicking off a series of CI 40 Influencers Under 40 podcasts. We'll be doing these for the next several weeks until we include just about everybody, if not literally everyone who is on our 40 Under 40 list for 2022. Really excited for our kickoff podcast to be joined by Stephen Mason, Global Account Manager with AVI-SPL, Jennifer Goodyer, who is Sales Manager with RTSales, Inc., Jenn Steinhardt, who is AV Design Consultant with Shen Milsom Wilke, SM&W, and Will DeWitt, who is Learning Environments Manager with the University of Southern California, USC. It'll be a fascinating conversation, and again, just the first of many to follow in the weeks ahead. Thank you for joining us on Commercial Integrator's AV Plus podcast.
As always, please like and subscribe to our YouTube page, and please subscribe to the AV Plus podcast on Apple and on Spotify.
Very excited to be joined by our first group of 4 influencer honorees who Commercial Integrator is celebrating this year. And I want to introduce each one of them in turn. Stephen Mason, who is Global Account Manager with AVI-SPL. Will DeWitt, Learning Environments Manager with the University of Southern California. Jennifer Goodyer, who is Sales Manager with RTSales, Inc. And Jenn Steinhardt, who is AV Design Consultant with Shen Milsom Wilke, SM&W. Congratulations to all 4 of you for having been named to the 40 Influencers Under 40 list. It's a real testament to how you are perceived in the industry by your peers, by your colleagues. So congratulations and welcome to the AV Plus podcast.
Thank you, Dan. I feel like we should be doing snaps during that announcement.
Yeah.
So I want to kind of talk a little bit about each of your backgrounds, your passion for the industry. And let's just start with each person in turn. Stephen, I know, as I say, Global Account Manager with AVI-SPL, working with a lot of AVI-SPL's global customers. Talk a little bit about what drew you to that organization and what fuels your passion, not only to remain a key member of the AVI-SPL team, but also a key contributor to the commercial integration industry broadly.
Yeah, so no, thanks for having me. I think it's a pretty cool story. This month is actually my 10-year anniversary at AVI-SPL, so it's kind of a cool month for me. So when I started at AVI-SPL, I live in Boston and obviously work out of the Boston office. I had just moved to Boston from the Midwest. I born and raised in Dallas, Texas, went to college in Southwest Missouri. When I graduated college, by the way, I went to college for music, thought I was going to be a rock star. I got to college, found out I was terrible. And, you know, as I started finishing college, I was like, I just got to get out here and figure out how do I get a real job? And luckily, I made a lot of connections in the sort of the live sound environment, you know, recording. And as you can kind of see, that's definitely a hobby nowadays for me. And I learned that there's a real, you know, business and industry out there around AV. And particularly for me, audio was like my passion. So when I graduated college, I was able to get a job at a small AV integrator in the Southwest Missouri area, did that for 2 years. And then, and we mostly focused on house of worship. And so, you know, using my like sound and audio skills was a lot of fun. The fun thing I always like to tell in that story about that, my time was I was in sales. It was a small AV integrator. So you kind of wore a lot of hats, you know, at any one time, but I was very anti being a salesperson. I was driven and passionate by helping people get the right solutions. But like I would just remember how much I would sort of butt heads with the idea of like, I don't want to be salesy and all that stuff. Like I just want to help people. And so I was able to, you know, sort of focus on that. But later in my career, I've certainly found the value of, you know, how sales can be helping people and all that. But anyways, moved to Boston. Interviewed, you know, with AVI-SPL. I was 24 at the time, And they, to be honest, didn't really want to give me too much of a shot because I was brand new to the market, to the region, young and all that. And so, I was able to convince them to give me a shot, and, sort of kind of the rest is history. It's been, a very awesome and successful time, the last 10 years. A lot of big things that, have certainly happened for me, in my time here. Definitely see a strong future here. So sort of no complaints there. Big things that I've sort of been really passionate about throughout my time is, very much helping people. And a lot of that was very technical driven. And sort of what I mean by that is, again, sort of shying away from the idea of being the salesy person. I always wanted to help people get the right solutions based on their real needs. And one thing that I found myself really good at was, customers could say, hey, I need this, and that. And I would look at them and say, okay, do you realize that when you just asked for this, and that, you just took the price tag way up here and the complexity of the system way up here? And they were like, oh, yeah. I'm like, yeah, you don't want to do that. You don't need that. And so I've sort of, if anything, pride myself on, helping customers, drive the price down so that they can, do more in the long term, and not to mention have better, reliable systems. So that's one thing I'm super passionate about today. And I'd say overall, just I've kind of transformed from being very technically focused and technically driven to more strategy focused and strategy driven, and just overall sort of customer success, right? If that makes sense. So that's kind of, sort of my time in transition here, and it's been great. Last couple of years, I've really kind of tapped into the personal branding and LinkedIn, market. If you check out my profile on LinkedIn, you'll find some really goofy videos that we did as an office. It was like kind of through the 2020 or late, early 2021 timeframe. We had a cool idea to shoot like a mockumentary like The Office. And it was something that we wrote the scripts, did all the filming, and basically did everything ourselves. None of us were experts at any of that, by the way. We were terrible actors, didn't know anything about script writing or editing or anything shooting film, but we figured it out. And it turned out pretty well, and it's pretty cool to see the feedback that we got from that. And yes, there is definitely a solid chance for a round 2 of those. Actually, starting the talks about that right now. It was just so much fun, and it was such an awesome team building activity. The whole purpose, by the way, of doing it was, it was in a time with lockdowns and stuff, we couldn't get physically in front of customers. So the idea was like, how do we make a name for ourselves, and sort of stay in front of our customers in this way that is actually going to be different and capture people's attention. And you know what, I'm not going to sit here and say that at the end of the day that we did exactly that, like as far as customer focus, but man, we got a lot of awesome feedback from the whole LinkedIn community. Just, this person's random friend cousin was like, hey, when is season 2 coming back, and it's very cool to hear that kind of feedback. But yeah, that's a very quick overview of sort of my story and time here.
Well, there's a lot of.
Could I jump in there real quick?
Sure, absolutely.
I'm very curious because, Stephen, your experience with sales, I relate very much into that in my AV journey, wearing many hats with the integrator as well. Is I felt kind of that same adverse feeling towards it. And I think a lot of people who are in technical roles can really, really relate to that. And there's a book by Ian Altman called Same Side Selling, that some of the stuff you were talking about, and that just that it's a solution and that you really are helping people when you're doing sales. That just really resonated with me. I thought that was interesting that you had pointed to that.
Yeah, I would just sort of add to that, where the number one thing that I've always done, and I do it in almost any sort of decision, sell, strategy, anything, is I put myself in my customer's shoes, and I try to answer questions based on, if I were them, would I want this? And sometimes that's most of the time that's good. That will lead to a good outcome. There are also times where you have to understand that there may be reasons they need something that you might not agree with, or you just simply don't understand, right? And that there's conversations for that. But I appreciate that. I mean, it's definitely, I would say one of the number one, factors of just overall success I've had.
So that consultative approach obviously is a key part of your success, Stephen. And I would think with SM&W, Jen, that kind of consultative approach is very, very important for you as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about your career trajectory? I think, I don't remember exactly when you joined SM&W, but it's been relatively, I think, a new career path for you, or at least a change in employer. So talk a little bit about what drew you into commercial AV and how your career has progressed.
Sure. So I've been, it's felt much longer, but I've been with SM&W since January this year. I've been in AV altogether for a little over 5 years, and started out in commercial, dabbled a little bit in residential, and then I missed commercial quite a bit and came back. But I started out as, just doing administrative work, and just needed a job. I, like most people, fell into it. I had always loved communications technology. And so when the opportunity presented itself, I was very, very excited for it. And I couldn't imagine doing anything else now. But I kind of worked my way up, doing project coordination work. I got involved into sales support and sales, working in our rentals department as well, and eventually found my way into service coordinator, which I did for about 2 years, once in commercial, and then carried on into the residential world. And all of that was really a trajectory of just exploring the different roles within the industry. So that's one of the great benefits of working for a smaller company that handles big clients, is being able to get that kind of exposure was just something I wouldn't trade for the world. And the rentals was a very unique experience because the integrator handled service, installs, design, service, and rentals. We got to kind of do it all, work with the different departments. I hope that I answered that question. ADHD, I'm like, just woo.
No, you definitely did. And, I think a lot of people wouldn't even recognize you've only been in the industry only for about 5 years, because you have a pretty high profile in the industry, and not just, with the @NerdyGirlAV Twitter handle, where you're, very active on social media, but you're also, something of a thought leader, I think, within the AV industry, diversity council, things of that nature, advocating in particular on behalf of neurodiversity, mental health awareness. What are your feelings about kind of cutting a relatively high profile in the industry?
It's incredibly exciting. I started speaking out about mental health and neurodiversity stemming from when I was very young. The attitude was, if an employer is aware that you have depression or anxiety or a learning disability for that matter, that you're not going to get a job. And while I do think that there is still a lot of stigma out there, the fact that the profile and the followers and the amazing feedback that I've gotten is just overwhelming, because it's a sign that more and more individuals and businesses and managers are open to it's just diversity of thought. It's, yes, of course, it can be, debilitating at times, but it's also has great strengths. And so it's just been absolutely remarkable to have the kind of feedback and reception that my advocacy has had.
Well, I do commend you for that advocacy, because I think when you speak about issues like that, I think it resonates with a lot of people who may not feel comfortable taking kind of a leadership or an advocate role themselves, but nevertheless, your message resonates with them and it raises people's consciousness. So separate and apart from the 40 under 40, although this obviously factored into recognizing you as being very much worthy of being honored, I celebrate your efforts in that regard.
Thank you very much. I think it's important too, because I sometimes feel self-conscious about it, in that the recognition that I've received is very much, is a lot around that advocacy, but it's really at the very bare bottom is also about giving back to the AV industry. And it's one small part of the world that I hope I can give back to. An important part.
Absolutely. So Will, I want to talk a little bit about how you found your way into higher education. I believe, just looking at the bio I have here, you were involved as kind of cameraman and editor for a national TV network, technology manager for a house of worship. But I believe you began in higher education back in 2018, and then this past February, joined the University of Southern California as the learning environments manager. Can you talk about what drew you to higher education? What then subsequently drew you in particular to USC, and why this is a passion of yours as well?
Sure. Well, I wouldn't say so much drawn in as fell backwards into. Like most things, there wasn't really a huge plan. I actually worked doing AV support in college as a student, so I've kind of come full circle. But I graduated there, worked in broadcast for a little bit, then did House of Worship for 8 years. Then I actually started working for a college in their event center, running their live events, doing customer service, setting up everything. And then from there, a job came open and I started working for College of Charleston as the AV manager, managing conference rooms, classrooms. And then eventually this job here at University of Southern California came up. And so really it's been in different areas, but pretty much all of it, except for when I was doing camera and video work, has been about customer service, whether that was house of worship, whether that was education, whatever it's been. It's more about just focusing on the customer, meeting their needs, and figuring out how to kind of prevent problems before they happen. So it's just kind of, like I said, it's kind of falling backwards into it, but it's also just a continuation.
Right. So what is the best part from your point of view about now that you've been with USC for about 6 months, 7 months? What is the best part of it, and what keeps you excited every day, keeps you motivated, keeps you engaged? Is it that kind of customer service mindset, working with the instructors, working with the students? Is it sometimes being on the cutting edge of new technology? I know USC is well known for having very well-equipped learning environments. It is definitely a cutting edge institution in that regard. What keeps you excited?
Yes, to all of it. But really it's just being able to perform at such a high level. The fact that I work with such quality people, we've got so many students, so much responsibility. We get to try out new things and get to really kind of experiment and lead the way in some cases on how we can best serve the customers. What kind of technology do we need to deploy in the rooms? How do we need to deploy ourselves so that we can cover that technology? We've got class starting in 2 weeks. And so right now, my entire thought process is, how do I schedule students? Where do I deploy them? How do I get them trained? How do I get the new ones integrated into it? There's always something new and different coming at me, but that's the kind of energy that I live off of. So it's just, I don't know, it's an exciting place to be. So that's what I've been enjoying.
Well, thank you so much, Will, for that perspective and those answers. And congratulations on, again, having been named to the 40 under 40 and beginning what I'm sure will be a very exciting and successful tenure at USC. Last, but certainly not least, I want to turn to Jennifer Goodyer, another honoree on the 40 under 40. correct me if I'm wrong, Jennifer, but I do believe you started in the industry about 11 years ago. And during those 11 years, obviously, you've had a lot of accomplishments. I want to talk about your involvement with the AVI-SPL Women's Council. I want to talk about your involvement with the Rosie Riveter's STEM program initiative, which I've been seeing a ton about on LinkedIn. People are really, really getting excited about it, funding STEM kits for young girls. The first thing I want to do, though, before we get into that, is just talk a little bit about RTSales and your involvement with it. I believe it's kind of a family business, and I'm sure it's a business, a passion for you.
Yeah, so my dad started it about over 40 years ago, and my brother now has taken over. And like Steve said, they were going to both be rock stars, and instead they decided to have a musical instrument rep firm. And then we started creeping into the pro AV world. And obviously the pro AV world super took off, and we got more and more involved, picked up more and more lines. My older brother, he hired me and said that I should get my CTS, and that's something I went for. So I got more and more involved with AVI-SPL and just kind of fell in love with the pro AV world, and that's where I focus the most.
So with that backstory about kind of how you became involved, let's first now get into what I had started with, which is your involvement with the Women's Council, your involvement with the Rosie Riveter's STEM program initiative. Can you talk about what has driven you to take, obviously you're very busy, you're limited time to say, I want to devote myself to these industry advocacy efforts. I want to try to empower young girls, attract them into the industry, give them these STEM kits. Where does this come from? What inspires you?
It was mostly noticing that we have such low numbers. I know Jen is aware of it as well, that it's, I think, 13% of women in our industry. And also of that 13%, less than 5 are under the age of 40. So that means that there's just basically no young women entering our industry. And there's not a lot of young people in general entering our industry. So I wanted to start, and I think that a lot of that has to do with there's not a ton of industry awareness. So I was hoping that if we could go and talk to young girls, everyone is putting so much emphasis on STEM. People are starting to realize how important that education is. So we go in and we talk to these girls about our industry and let them know there's a career path here. This is something you can do. And we want it to be also for all young people.
It should be for all young people. And those statistics that you share, I think, are pretty sobering. Not just the continued male centricity of our industry, but having, lower mid-single digits of females under 40 who are populating the industry. That it's an inauspicious sign, but I'm glad to know that there are great minds and powerful advocates that are working to reverse that, working to change that. And I know that, as I had mentioned a couple of times, that the Rosie Riveter's program has really generated impressive funds. I think it's 30,000 at this point, and it could be beyond that. That figure may be dated. Those STEM kits for young girls. Do you feel like when those are delivered into those waiting hands, do you feel like you can almost see people being drawn into these STEM fields? You can kind of plant the seed that in 5 years, 10 years, maybe even less than that, is going to bring people, whether it's into commercial AV, whether it's into IT, whether it's into engineering of some other sort, that we're going to actually bring these people into this industry?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We actually already had Rosie Riveters, because Rosie Riveters, they are a nonprofit and they follow these students. They don't just hand them STEM kits, hand them STEM programs, and then say goodbye once they are out of elementary school and middle school. They follow them all the way through to college. And we actually just got a reference from Rosie Riveters of a girl that's at one of the USC academies, and she is into video production. So they sent us her information and said, do you know anyone in the LA area that could help her? And I went ahead and copied in the LA AVI-SPL Women's Council. And now I think she has 5 female mentors in the video production in LA that are going to help her all the way through. And how can you, if you were interested in video production and you're trying to make your way in, you don't have any mentors, I can see you getting pushed away from it. But now that you have 5 female mentors in our industry that are successful and they're going to walk you through it, there you go. We got someone.
Yeah. I mean, that's absolutely fantastic. And speaking about the word mentor, I think all four of you, whether directly or indirectly, are kind of mentors or inspirations at least, and will be when we publicly announce all the names. We're recording this on Monday, the 15th. To people who aspire to be the influencers that all four of you are, that all 40 of the 40 under 40 are. Do you feel a certain responsibility individually, collectively, as members of this industry community to try to seed the next generation, to try to forge a path, not just for girls and women, but also for young men and boys? And do you feel that there's a responsibility you have as people who have attained a certain considerable level of success to try to make sure that people can follow in your footsteps, and you kind of bring a ladder down and a hand out to pull people up?
Yeah.
Definitely. I think the attitude among, well, most people I've seen here is not so much I had to struggle, so you should have to struggle, but I had to struggle, so you shouldn't have to. And how can we help and bring other people up with us?
Yeah, the other thing that, like, I remember when I first got into the industry and started to learn about it and learn about like Infocom and Avixa, was that everyone kind of seemed to say like, oh, we just fell into this industry, which I think is probably still true, but like, how do we change that? Like, how do we make it a more attractive industry that people don't just fall into, and they want to come work for and work with, right? Like that would be really cool to see a change in that mentality around our industry. Something that I've started to have talks with leadership about internally at AVI about, how can we create like, maybe like a junior sales associate or program, something, whatever you want to call it, that would sort of help us, bring in, people who may be very young and just have never had experience in, professional level of sales. And, they, come under, the wing of a mentor, internally to the organization, like, maybe a more experienced seller. And, we help them and show them, how to be successful, because I assure you, it's a very, there's certain aspects of the industry is definitely very difficult, jobs, no doubt. And, we're dealing with technology that seems to love Murphy's Law a lot of times. And, it's just, it makes all of us just have very stressful days sometimes. So, but help them through the ropes. And if anything, one thing I'm super passionate about, just at a people level, is getting people to understand that we're all more capable of doing more, being like, being better at our careers. And like, if there's actual goals that you can, imagine, you can have those things if you put the, the action forward to get to those goals. And, I can't obviously change the world overnight with that sort of message, but, I would love nothing more than an opportunity to do it, on a person-to-person, basis at the day-to-day level, right? With, colleagues and, something like, someone coming fresh into the industry.
Yeah. I think it also comes down to, there's the one side of it, which is getting youth into the industry. And then there's also a side of, I took a very untraditional approach into my role, is that I didn't originate from a technical place. I came from sales, marketing, and communications, and I am now doing designs. That was a very not normal, not that much about me is normal, but approach. And so I think that as an industry and as companies, that we think through how can we get more young individuals into the industry. What are we also doing for the people already in this industry that may want to pivot out into another role that they're in as well?
Yeah, the whole industry has got to be everyone's into it, because we started the whole Rosie Riveters initiative with a $5,000 goal, saying, I hope we can hit that goal. That'd be cool. And then everyone in the industry stood up and said, this is super important. We need young people in our industry. We need to have some sort of career pathway for them. And that's why we're well over 32,000 now, is because everyone in this industry said this is important.
Well, it's a wonderful thing to see, going over your goal by 6 times, and obviously not stopping by any means. I still, when I go on LinkedIn, see the Rosie Riveters Initiative all the time. So it's a wonderful and affirming, and it's just a tremendous thing to see. We've been going about a half hour, but I feel like I would be remiss not to ask at least one question, which is, I'd like to draw on your perspectives. You've heard about terms like brain drain, the idea of people maybe leaving commercial AV, they might go to IT, they might be drawn by Silicon Valley, whatever the case might be. When you think about organizations like yours, like other organizations in the industry, what can they do to retain talent like yourselves? What is going to keep you part of the commercial AV industry and your respective organizations for the long term? And then that can be broadened out to think about people who are your peers, others on the 40 under 40. How can we keep people like you in our industry contributing in our circles?
Don't all go at once. I would say, so the number one thing that if anyone is to take something away from this, I would say is to ask your employees. All 4 of us here today could say, here's what would keep me, but what I will be most successful is asking your team. For me personally, having a understanding and flexible policy in terms of flex schedules, not saying arrive to the office on Mondays and Wednesdays, and being intentional about those strategies. What is enabling people to do their best work? That is, for me, top notch on a retention level. And what are you doing to educate and to help continue learning? I would be remiss if I didn't address that as well.
Anyone else?
Yeah, just to add, or go ahead, Stephen.
Sorry, I love the comment about asking the employees, just because something that you guys said a second ago was, Jen, you fell into design from a untraditional path, right? Mm-hmm. I've found personally people who get to wherever they're currently at from the untraditional way are always the best people, like the best, most talented, team members or whatever. And I think sometimes we think like, oh, if I'm a tech, well, my next step has to be this. Like it has to be this, and then I have to do that before I can ever get there. And that's not true. This all goes back to, helping people, decide, what are their long-term career goals, and, how can we help get you there? And it doesn't mean that you have to go through this long, path or whatever to get there. It can happen a lot sooner.
Will?
Yeah, to add on to that, it goes back to asking your employees, but figuring out how to make them feel invested, and how they feel like they're positively contributing. And that's going to be different for everyone, depending on what their role is, what kind of job you're doing. But once you have that investment, they understand how they fit into the larger picture, they'll take whatever they're given and run with it and do a much better job than if you sat there and tried to spell out for them exactly what you needed them to do.
That's huge. Yeah, that is huge. I've seen the successes of that, and I've seen the opposite of that.
I definitely agree with that everyone just wants to feel autonomy over what they're doing. I think everyone wants to feel supported. And then again, as Jen said, if you want to kind of branch out, do something else, I think that you want to feel supported by your employer. You want to feel like they care about your education and what you want to do next.
Well, thank you for taking the time to kind of answer that question candidly, because my own position editorializing is that every one of the 40 under 40 this year is really a singular, unique contributor to our industry. And we wouldn't want to lose any of you, either in the immediate term or even in the intermediate term, because you make real material, concrete contributions to our craft and our trade. So I think it's important for the decision makers and the C-suite executives in commercial AV to be aware of what is going to keep you in our industry family and keep you motivated and keep you enthusiastic and keep you contributing at the high level that you are. And obviously you are contributing at a very high level, having been CI 40 under 40 honorees. So thank you for joining me on this podcast, and thank you for sharing your insights with us.
Such an honor. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So happy to have been joined by Stephen Mason, Global Account Manager with AVI-SPL, Will DeWitt, Learning Environments Manager with the University of Southern California, USC, Jennifer Goodyer, who is Sales Manager with RTSales, Inc., and Jenn Steinhardt, who is AV Design Consultant with Shen Milsom Wilke, SM&W. My name is Dan Ferrisi, Editor-in-Chief with Commercial Integrator, and we look forward to seeing you back here next week for another edition of AV Plus, the podcast for the commercial AV integration industry. Thank you.